Love is not a lease agreement. It does not come with clauses that obligate you to absorb mistreatment in proportion to how genuinely you feel it. It does not include fine print that says the depth of your caring is the measure of how much you are required to tolerate. It does not transform the behavior that hurts you into something acceptable simply because the person producing the behavior is someone you genuinely, specifically deeply care about. This sounds obvious when it is stated plainly. It is considerably less obvious when you are inside the experience of loving someone whose attachment style means that the behavior and the genuine feeling exist simultaneously. When the withdrawal and the warmth come from the same person, when the devaluation and the real connection are both authentically present, when the architecture's operation and the genuine love beneath it are so intertwined that separating them feels like it would require separating the person from themselves. That difficulty is real. It is not weakness or naivety that makes the separation hard. It is the genuine complexity of the situation, the accurate perception that the behavior is fear-driven rather than malicious, that the person is not the same as the pattern, that what is underneath the architecture is genuinely worth caring about. All of this is true, and none of it changes what is also true, that you are a person whose experience of the behavior is real regardless of its source, whose needs are legitimate regardless of the avoidance capacity to meet them, and whose well-being matters independently of your understanding of why the behavior is happening. Understanding why someone behaves the way they do is genuinely valuable. It can produce compassion where judgment might otherwise live. It can prevent the false conclusions that the behavior means you're inadequate, that the withdrawal means you're not worth staying for, that the fault finding means the faults are real. These are important corrections. The psychology is genuinely useful, but understanding the why has a specific limit that is worth naming clearly. The limit is this: understanding the source of behavior that hurts you does not obligate you to continue receiving it. Compassion for someone's fear does not require you to make yourself the ongoing target of that fear's expression. The accurate perception that the architecture is the problem rather than the person does not mean you must remain in the architecture's path indefinitely while waiting for the person to develop the capacity to dismantle it. There is a story that gets told in the landscape of attachment psychology and the content that surrounds it that can become its own kind of trap if it isn't examined carefully. The story is roughly this: if you understand the avoidance behavior deeply enough, if you develop sufficient patience and sufficient grounded equanimity in the face of the withdrawal and the deactivation, the relationship can become what it was always capable of being. The understanding is the path, the patience is the method, the self-possession is what makes the difference. There is genuine truth in this. The understanding does matter. The patience has real value. The self-possession is genuinely important. These things have been examined at length in this series, and the examination was honest. They are real contributors to the possibility of something different developing in the dynamic. What the story can obscure, when it is held without the other half, is the question of what you are doing while you are being understanding and patient and self-possessed. Whether the being understanding is also including an honest accounting of what the behavior is costing you. Whether the patience has a genuine limit or is functioning as the indefinite suspension of your own legitimate needs in favor of the avoidance developmental timeline. Whether the self-possession is genuine or is the performance of not needing things you actually need, because naming those needs feels incompatible with the understanding. The other half of the story is this: understanding avoidant psychology is not the same as accepting avoidant behavior as the permanent condition of a relationship you invest yourself in. The two are not the same thing, and they are worth separating clearly. Accepting behavior and understanding behavior are categorically different. Understanding says, I can see why this is happening. I can trace the fear to its source. I can hold the complexity of someone whose genuine feeling and whose architecture's operation are producing contradictory experiences in me simultaneously. Understanding is an intellectual and emotional capacity. It lives in the mind and in the compassionate extension of perspective towards someone whose history made them who they are. Accepting says, This is what I am willing to have as the ongoing condition of my life, this level of availability, this quality of engagement, this specific experience of warmth, followed by withdrawal, of genuine connection followed by deactivation, of being genuinely seen in some moments and managed against in others. Accepting is not intellectual, it is behavioral. It is the lived reality of what you continue to participate in. You can understand completely and accept minimally. The two do not require each other. You can carry full, accurate, compassionate understanding of the avoidance psychology, can know precisely why the behavior is happening and what it is protecting and what it is costing the avoidant as well as you, and simultaneously hold, with equal clarity, that the behavior as a sustained condition of your relational life is not what you are willing to accept. This separation is important because without it, understanding becomes a trap, becomes the thing that prevents you from acting on accurate information about your own needs and your own well-being, becomes, paradoxically, the thing that the avoidance behavior hides behind, not deliberately, not as a strategy, but structurally. The more thoroughly you understand the fear, the harder it is to hold the fear's expression accountable for its impact on you. The compassion for the origin becomes the cover for the consequence. The impact is real. This needs to be stated simply and without the softening that the psychological framing can inadvertently apply to it. The experience of loving someone with avoidant attachment and living in the ongoing dynamic of the architecture's operation is genuinely costly. The specific, accumulated chronic cost of inconsistent availability, of never quite knowing which version of the person you are getting in any given interaction, of the genuine warmth that arrives and then retreats, and the not knowing when the retreat is coming that keeps the nervous system in a state of low-grade alert, of interpreting ambiguous signals, of adjusting your behavior to manage their comfort, of having your genuine expression of need met with the specific, managed distance that says without words that your need is too much. These costs are not trivial. They are not the ordinary friction of two imperfect people navigating a genuine relationship. They are the specific, pattern-produced, fear architecture-generated costs of being in a dynamic where one person's regulatory system is running on the other person's emotional engagement as a resource, where the closeness you offer is being processed as threat rather than as gift, where the genuine love you bring to the relationship keeps meeting the architecture's operation rather than the person's genuine interior. Over time, these costs do something specific to the person absorbing them. They erode, not the love. The love often persists with a stubbornness that its cost seems unable to justify, but something else, the specific confidence that your needs are reasonable, the basic self-assurance that wanting genuine reciprocity is not asking for too much, the grounded sense of your own worth that should not require external validation to remain intact, but that, under sustained conditions of having your investment partially refused and your needs processed as threat, develops the specific softness that makes it vulnerable to the devaluation and the fault-finding and the managed distance. You deserve to know that this erosion is real and that it is one of the costs that the psychological understanding of the avoidance behavior tends to underaccount for. The framing that says the behavior is fear-driven rather than malicious is accurate and important. It is also incomplete if it stops there, without acknowledging that fear-driven behavior that impacts another person still impacts that person. The impact is not neutralized by the sources being fear rather than malice. You feel what you feel regardless of what the avoidant intended. The question of what you are willing to accept is genuinely yours to determine, not according to anyone else's framework for how much patience genuine love requires, not according to the psychological understanding of what the avoidant needs in order to develop toward greater capacity, not according to the story that says the understanding and the patience and the self-possession are the path to the relationship becoming what it is capable of being, yours, according to your honest assessment of what you are actually experiencing and what it is actually costing you and what you actually require in order to genuinely thrive in a relationship rather than simply survive it. The honest assessment includes several questions worth sitting with directly. Is the relationship moving? Not in the sense of reaching a destination, but in the sense of genuine direction. Is there actual, behavioral, evidenced movement toward greater genuine availability over time? Or is the orbit stable, the same distance maintained, with the same consistency, the same retreats occurring with the same triggers, the same warmth appearing and disappearing on the same pattern? Movement and stability look different. One involves genuine change in the pattern's expression across time. The other involves the pattern reproducing itself across time, with sufficient variation to maintain the appearance of possibility without the substance of it. Is the cost stable or accumulating? Some costs are sustainable because they are offset by genuine return. The work of navigating an avoidant dynamic is not inherently unsustainable if the genuine moments of real connection are real enough and frequent enough, and the overall trajectory is toward more of those moments rather than fewer. The cost may be one that the genuine return makes worth paying. But if the cost is accumulating without corresponding increase in the return, if the genuine moments are not becoming more frequent or more sustained, if the retreats are not becoming shorter, if the quality of genuine engagement is not developing, then the cost is accumulating into debt rather than being offset by return. Are you being yourself? Not the managed version, not the version calibrated to maintain the avoidance regulatory comfort, the actual, full, genuine version of yourself, with your actual needs expressed at their actual level, your actual feelings present at their actual intensity, your actual requirements held without the minimizing that makes them fit inside the avoidance available capacity. If you are being yourself fully and the relationship is functioning, if the fullness of your genuine self is being met with something real rather than with the architecture's management, that is genuinely significant. If you are being a reduced version of yourself in order to maintain the relationship's functioning, that reduction is a cost that deserves honest accounting. None of these questions have prescribed answers. The honest answers vary by situation, by where the avoidant is in their own development, by what the specific dynamic between the two specific people actually produces. The point of the questions is not to lead toward a predetermined conclusion. The point is the honest answering of them, the genuine, self-respecting assessment of what is actually present, rather than the assessment filtered through the love's persistence, or the understanding's compassion, or the hope that the trajectory is towards something better, even when the evidence for that trajectory is thin. The love is real, the understanding is genuine, the compassion for the avoidance fear, and the avoidance wound and the avoidance genuine feeling that keeps being overridden by the architecture's operation. All of this is real and it matters, and it is not something to be discarded in the name of a simpler, less compassionate reading of the situation. And you are also real. Your needs are also genuine. Your experience of the dynamic is also legitimate data about what is actually happening. Your well-being is also a thing that matters, independently of the avoidance developmental timeline and the understanding's extension of compassion toward the fear and the hope that the patience will eventually produce something different. Both of these things are simultaneously entirely true. The avoidance psychology is genuinely complex and genuinely worthy of compassion. Your needs are genuinely legitimate and genuinely worthy of being met. These are not in conflict as facts. They are only in conflict if the compassion for one is allowed to erase the legitimacy of the other. You are allowed to love someone and simultaneously require that the love be expressed in conditions that do not chronically cost you your sense of your own worth. You are allowed to understand someone's fear and simultaneously decline to be the indefinite target of that fear's expression. You are allowed to hold compassion for the avoidance wound and simultaneously hold the clear, non-negotiable knowledge that your own well-being is not a resource to be indefinitely consumed in the service of another person's unaddressed psychology. You do not have to accept the behavior because you love them. The love and the limit are not opposites. They are both expressions of genuine care. One, directed outward toward the avoidant. One, directed inward toward yourself. Both legitimate, both necessary, both deserving of the same honest, clear-eyed, non-negotiable respect. The limit is not the failure of the love. It is the love for yourself that the love for them was never supposed to replace. And that love, the one directed inward, toward your own genuine well-being and your own genuine needs and your own genuine worth, is the one that was always supposed to come first. Not instead of the love for them, alongside it, first. The love for yourself that was always supposed to come first is not a concept most people in this dynamic have had adequate access to. Not because they lack self-regard in the abstract, but because the specific, ongoing, daily experience of loving someone with avoidant attachment creates conditions that make self-directed love genuinely difficult to maintain at its full level. The conditions are not dramatic. They are the specific, cumulative, low-grade conditions of a dynamic that keeps asking you to make yourself smaller in ways that are individually minor and collectively significant. The asking is rarely explicit. The avoidant does not usually say, in clear terms, that your needs are too much, or your feelings are unwelcome, or your genuine self at full expression is more than the architecture can accommodate. What happens is more subtle and more pervasive than explicit communication. It happens in the specific, consistent pattern of what gets responded to warmly and what produces the retreat. In the way genuine expression of need meets managed distance rather than genuine reception. In the way full emotional presence from you activates the deactivating strategies rather than genuine engagement. In the way the relationship functions better, more smoothly, more warmly, with less of the architecture's management producing the cooling, when you are operating at something below your full genuine level. The pattern teaches without teaching explicitly. You learn what produces the warmth and what produces the withdrawal. You learn the specific emotional register in which you can exist without activating the architecture's response. You learn, without anyone telling you to learn it, the version of yourself that fits inside the avoidance available capacity. And the learning is not a decision. It is the ordinary, adaptive, entirely human process of calibrating behavior to environment. The environment keeps responding better to the reduced version. The reduced version becomes, gradually and without announcement, the operating version. This calibration is one of the most significant and least discussed costs of the avoidant dynamic, because it is not experienced as a cost in the moment. It is experienced as successful navigation, as the development of skill in managing the dynamic, as the growth of understanding that allows the relationship to function at a level that the unskilled version could not sustain. The calibration feels like competence, feels like the expression of genuine care, the willingness to understand what someone needs and to organize your behavior in service of providing it. It is also the ongoing, daily, largely invisible reduction of your genuine self to the size that someone else's fear can accommodate. The reduction accumulates over months of the dynamic, over the full arc of what the relationship's history contains. The gap between the calibrated to the avoidant version of you and the full genuine version develops a width that begins to be felt as something, as the specific, sourceless, difficult to name sense that something in you is not being fully expressed, that the life you are living in the relationship has a quality of partial inhabiting, of being present but not quite fully present, of existing in the relationship but at a level that is consistently something less than what exists in you to bring. This is the cost that the love covers, that the genuine feeling for the avoidant, combined with the accurate understanding of the psychology, combined with the compassion for the fear, combines to keep beneath the level of full acknowledgement. You know, at some level, that you are not fully yourself in the dynamic, but the knowing is managed, is attributed to the ordinary compromises of genuine relationship, rather than to the specific, pattern-produced reduction that the architecture requires, is held as something to be addressed eventually, once the dynamic stabilizes, once the avoidance development progresses, once the conditions are more favorable for the full version of you to be safely present. The eventually keeps being deferred, not because the avoidant is deliberately preventing it, because the conditions for the full version of you to be safely present are the conditions of a relationship in which the architecture has been sufficiently dismantled that genuine availability is the consistent baseline rather than the exception. And the dismantling of the architecture is the work of the avoidant's own development, work that cannot be scheduled, cannot be accelerated by your patience, cannot be made to arrive on a timeline that is convenient for the deferral of your full self-expression. What the love for yourself requires in this context is the honest naming of what the deferral is costing, not as an accusation directed at the avoidant, as an honest accounting directed at yourself, the specific, honest, non-minimized acknowledgement of what you are carrying, what the dynamic requires of you in terms of the ongoing management of your own emotional expression, what the calibration has cost in terms of the parts of yourself that have been living in the reduced register for long enough that their reduction has started to feel normal. The accounting is not about building a case. It is about the genuine, self-respecting act of seeing clearly what is actually present in your own experience, rather than through the softening lens that the compassion and the understanding and the love habitually apply to it. The softening is real and has value. It is also incomplete as a full picture. The full picture includes what you feel when you are with the avoidant, in the moments that require the calibrated version. What happens in your body when the genuine expression of a genuine feeling meets the managed distance? What the specific experience of having your investment processed as threat rather than as gift actually costs in terms of the felt sense of your own worth. The felt sense of your own worth is the thing most worth protecting in this dynamic, not as an abstract self-esteem concept, as the specific, bodily, immediate experience quality of knowing that your genuine self, at full expression, without calibration, without reduction, is welcome, is received, is met with something that honors its presence, rather than managing it toward a more tolerable level. This knowing requires consistent, experiential confirmation to remain stable. It is not purely internally generated. It is partly produced in all of us by the lived experience of being genuinely received by the people we are in genuine relationship with. The experience of being fully yourself and having the fullness be not just tolerated but genuinely welcomed, genuinely met with equivalent presence, genuinely engaged with at the depth it is offered, is one of the primary ways that the felt sense of worth maintains itself as a living, present experience, rather than as an intellectual position. The avoidant dynamic provides this experience inconsistently and partially. The genuine moments, when the architecture steps back and the real person is present and what you bring is genuinely met, provided in the specific, irreplaceable form that makes those moments feel like arrival. These moments are real. They are not nothing, but they are surrounded by the architecture's consistent operation, which provides a different experience, the experience of being received partially, of the genuine expression meeting the managed response, of your full presence activating the distance regulation rather than the genuine welcome. The inconsistency is the issue, not the architecture's imperfect moments. All relationships have imperfect moments. The pattern of inconsistency, the specific fear-driven architecture-generated pattern in which the moments of genuine reception are consistently followed by the architecture's reassertion. The pattern that makes the felt sense of worth contingent on the avoidance current temperature, rather than grounded in the stable, consistent, reliable experience of genuine welcome that worth requires to remain fully intact. The requirement of genuine consistency is not an unreasonable standard. It is what functional relationships provide as their baseline. Not perfect consistency. No relationship provides perfect consistency, and the requirement of perfection would be its own kind of problem. But the baseline consistency of being genuinely received as yourself more often than not, of the warmth being reliable enough that the retreat is the exception rather than an equal partner with the warmth, of the genuine engagement being the dominant mode rather than alternating equally with the architecture's management. This is not a high bar. It is the ordinary baseline of a functioning relationship between two people who are genuinely present to each other. It is, however, a bar that the avoidant dynamic, in its active architecture running, deactivating strategies operating form, consistently fails to clear. Not because the avoidant doesn't care, because the architecture's operation is incompatible with the consistent baseline the standard requires. You are allowed to require the baseline, not as an ultimatum, as the honest expression of what genuine relationship requires from your perspective. The baseline is not a demand born of insecurity or an expression of neediness that the understanding should recognize as excessive. It is the reasonable, legitimate, non-negotiable minimum of what genuine reciprocal relationship means. The avoidance fear is real and deserves compassion. Your requirement of the baseline is also real and deserves the same respect. Both are true. Both matter, and neither one is in a position to permanently override the other without producing an imbalance that costs whoever is absorbing the override more than genuine relationship should ask anyone to absorb. The permission to require the baseline is something that the dynamic itself tends to erode. The ongoing experience of the architecture's operation, the consistent pattern of the genuine expression, meeting the managed response, teaches over time that the baseline is not available here. And when something is consistently not available, the adaptive response is to stop requiring it, to revise the standard downward to match what is consistently present, to learn to find enough in the partial, inconsistent, architecture-mediated version of reception to sustain the investment. This revision is not weakness, it is adaptation. It is the ordinary human capacity for finding what is good in imperfect conditions and organizing around that, rather than around what is absent. But it is worth naming as adaptation rather than as the natural calibration of a reasonable standard to a realistic situation. The standard is not being calibrated to reality. The standard is being revised downward to match a specific deficit in the available conditions, and the revision, allowed to complete, produces a relationship in which your genuine needs are no longer being communicated, not because they were addressed, but because the communication was adapted out of you by the consistent pattern of their partial reception. The adaptation is the cost that most needs to be seen, more than the specific incidents of withdrawal or fault-finding or manufactured ambiguity, more than any single behavior of the architecture's operation. The cumulative adaptation to the architecture's consistent pattern, the specific reduction of your genuine requirements to the level the architecture can tolerate, is the cost that goes deepest and lasts longest and shapes most significantly what you carry forward from the dynamic into everything that follows it. What the love for yourself requires, as the non-negotiable first love that was always supposed to precede the love for the avoidant, is the refusal of the complete adaptation, not the refusal of all flexibility. Flexibility is genuinely valuable, and the willingness to work with imperfection is genuinely important. But the refusal of the specific, pattern-produced fear architecture required reduction of your genuine self to the size that someone else's unaddressed psychology can accommodate. The refusal is not aggressive, is not the dramatic assertion of needs in a way that the compassion for the avoidance fear would recognize as the threatening demand the template always predicted. It is simply the grounded, clear, non-negotiable presence of the genuine version of you, with your actual needs at their actual level and your actual requirements held without the minimizing that makes them fit inside the available capacity, and your actual worth experienced as the stable, internally sourced, non-contingent reality that it is. This is exactly what the became version of you represents: the refusal of the complete adaptation, the maintenance of the full genuine self in the face of the pattern's consistent pressure toward reduction, the grounded presence of someone who loves genuinely and requires genuine reciprocity, and holds both of these without making the requirement the enemy of the love, or the love the override of the requirement. The became is the love for yourself expressed in relational form, not against the love for the avoidant, alongside it, first. That is the thing the dynamic was always asking you to lose, the thing the calibration was always working toward eroding, the thing the compassion and the understanding and the patience held without the other half of the picture were always at risk of displacing. The love for yourself, first, not instead of everything else, not in opposition to genuine care for another person, first as the foundation on which everything else is built. the foundation without which the love for the avoidant has no stable floor to stand on, without which the patience is servitude, without which the understanding is complicity, without which the compassion is the cover that the fear hides behind at your expense. With the love for yourself as the first and non-negotiable foundation, everything else can be what it genuinely is. The love for the avoidant is real care offered from genuine abundance rather than from the anxious depletion of someone who has been giving from the wrong direction. The patience is genuine tolerance offered from genuine stability rather than from the hope-sustained suspension of legitimate needs. The understanding is real compassion offered from genuine clarity rather than from the softening of accurate perception by the fear of what the accuracy might require. First, the love for yourself. First. That is the answer to the question the title asks, not a rhetorical answer, an actual, lived, daily, non-negotiable answer. You do not have to accept the behavior because you love them, because you love yourself first. And the self you love first is the self that knows clearly, completely, without apology, that love given from a foundation of genuine self-respect is the only kind of love that produces genuine relationship. Everything else is the adaptation, and the adaptation was never what either of you actually needed. The adaptation is worth examining more concretely than it has been examined so far, because the word adaptation, however accurate, can remain at a level of abstraction that lets the mind acknowledge it without the acknowledgement landing in the body where the actual cost lives. So what follows is the specific, granular, this is what it actually looks like, examination of what the adaptation produces in the daily, lived reality of someone who has been loving and avoiding across a significant period of time. It looks like editing yourself before you speak. The thought forms genuine, real, carrying the actual weight of what you feel. And before it reaches expression, it passes through the filter. The filter asks, will this activate the withdrawal? Will this register as too much? Is the timing right? Is the tone calibrated? Is the level of emotional directness within the range that won't produce the cooling? The thought that survives the filter is a managed version of the original. The expression that arrives in the conversation has been processed through the anxiety of anticipated response before it ever left you. And this happens quickly, automatically, below the level of deliberate decision, because the pattern has been internalized to the point where the filtering is faster than the feeling. This is the adaptation made visible, not in a single dramatic moment of self-suppression, in the ordinary, daily, before every genuine expression filtering that happens so fast and so consistently that it begins to feel like the natural way of speaking rather than the managed version of it. It looks like reading the temperature before entering a room, the awareness of the avoidance current emotional state that precedes every interaction, the specific, attuned, vigilance level monitoring of what today's version of them is like before you bring yourself into contact with it. Is today a warm day or a distant day? Is there openness available, or is the architecture running high? This reading happens before the interaction begins, shapes how you show up in it, determines what version of yourself you bring, and at what level of expression, and with what degree of the genuine self, either offered or held back. The monitoring is a form of labor, not the labor of a task with a beginning and an end, but the labor of a continuous background process that never fully switches off. The low-level, always running attentiveness to another person's emotional state that keeps the interaction calibrated to what the temperature will support. This is your attunement, your genuine, finely developed, extraordinarily sensitive capacity for reading another person's interior, being deployed not in the service of genuine connection, but in the service of relational safety management. The capacity that was your gift is running as your anxiety. It looks like explaining your needs to yourself as unreasonable before you have even considered expressing them. The want or the need forms in the genuine interior of your experience and is immediately, before it reaches any outward expression, subjected to the internal cross-examination. Is this too much? Is this what a reasonable person would need? Or is this the neediness the architecture's consistent response to your needs has taught you to suspect in yourself? The cross-examination is not innocent self-reflection. It is the internalized version of the architecture's response to your needs, the managed distance, the processing of need as threat, now running inside you as your own voice, rather than as the avoidance behavior. This is perhaps the most specific and the most costly form the adaptation takes, when the architecture's response to your needs becomes your own preemptive response to your needs. When you are performing the devaluation of your own genuine requirements before the avoidant has the opportunity to perform it externally, when you have absorbed the architecture's message that your needs are too much, that your genuine self at full expression is more than the available capacity, that the requirement of genuine reciprocity is asking for something unreasonable, so thoroughly that the message is now running in your own interior as your own assessment, the architecture has achieved, through the patient accumulation of its consistent operation, something more complete than the management of your external behavior. It has influenced the internal narrative through which you relate to your own genuine experience. Naming this clearly is not an exercise in blame. The avoidant did not deliberately install this narrative in you. The architecture was running its standard protocols against your investment, and the investment over time adapted to the protocols in the way all intelligence systems adapt to consistent environmental pressures. The adaptation was a response to a pattern, not the deliberate production of a psychological effect. But the naming matters because the internalized version of the architecture's response to your needs is the most insidious cost of the dynamic, precisely because it is invisible from the outside and nearly invisible. From the inside, the external behaviors of the dynamic, the withdrawal, the devaluation, the ambiguity, are at least visible. They produce a felt experience that can be examined and named and held accountable. The internalized version produces no external event to point to. It simply runs, in the interior, as the quiet, self-directed version of what the architecture does externally. And because it runs in your own voice, it does not feel like something that was produced by the dynamic. It feels like your own honest assessment of yourself. It is not. It is the adaptation speaking in your voice. Distinguishing between your genuine self-knowledge and the adaptation's voice is one of the more important and more difficult tasks available in the recovery from this dynamic. Not the recovery in the sense of healing from ending, the recovery in the sense of restoring the genuine interior that the adaptation was working on throughout the dynamic's active period. The restoration of the full, unfiltered, unedited version of your own sense of what you need and what you deserve and what genuine reciprocity looks like when it is actually present. The distinction has a specific test. Genuine self-knowledge about your own needs produces a quality of settled recognition. The acknowledgement of a genuine need feels like contact with something real, grounded, clear, belonging to you in a way that is not contingent on anyone else's assessment of its reasonableness. The adaptation's voice produces a different quality, a quality of anxiety, of preemptive diminishment, of the need being measured before it is felt, calibrated against an external standard before it is acknowledged internally. The anxiety is the tell. Genuine self-knowledge is not anxious about itself. It is simply present. When you feel the anxiety around your own needs, when the need forms and is immediately subjected to the cross-examination about whether it is too much, that anxiety is the adaptation running. It is the internalized architecture questioning the legitimacy of your genuine experience before you have even had the chance to hold it as legitimate yourself. The response to recognizing the adaptation's voice is not to force the expression of the need in opposition to the anxiety. It is simpler than that. It is to notice the anxiety as the artifact it is and return to the need itself, to the genuine, pre-examined, not yet filtered experience of what you actually want and what you actually require. To hold it there in the interior without immediately subjecting it to the assessment of whether expressing it will be safe. The holding is the first act of the love for yourself, the simple, grounded, patient holding of your own genuine experience as legitimate, before you have done anything with it externally. The love for yourself that comes first is not a practice of self-assertion. It is not the aggressive claiming of needs or the dramatic declaration of limits or the performance of self-worth for an external audience. It is quieter than any of that. It is the private, daily, often entirely internal practice of returning to your own genuine experience as the primary reference point, before the temperature reading, before the pre-expression filtering, before the internalized cross-examination about whether the need is too much. Return to the genuine interior, to what is actually there prior to the adaptation's processing of it, to the specific, real, undoctored experience of your own genuine state. This return is the practice, not a dramatic self-reinvention. The simple, repeated, patient act of treating your own genuine experience as the thing that deserves first attention, rather than the thing that gets processed through the avoidant's likely response before receiving any attention at all. Over time, the repeated return does something to the adaptation's voice. Not silence it immediately. The adaptation was built through sustained experience and is not undone through a single decision or a brief period of counter-practice. But it begins to introduce a competing reference point. The adaptation's voice says your needs are too much. The return to genuine experience says this is what I actually feel. The two voices coexist initially. Over time, with enough genuine contact with your own interior to rebuild the stable, internally sourced sense of what is legitimate, the adaptation's voice loses its automatic authority, begins to be recognized as what it is, the internalized echo of a pattern's consistent operation, rather than as the accurate assessment of your actual experience. The love for yourself, practiced as this quiet, consistent, non-dramatic return to your own genuine interior, is ultimately what the became version of you is built from. Not from the dramatic moment of choosing yourself, not from the decisive act of refusing the dynamic, from the accumulation of the small, private, daily choices to treat your own genuine experience as worth returning to before anything else, to hold your own needs as legitimate before cross-examining their reasonableness, to exist in your own interior as a welcome guest rather than as a managed presence that needs to be kept at the level the available capacity can accommodate. This is the foundation, not the structure built on it, the self-possession and the clarity and the non-manageable genuine power that the became version expresses externally. The foundation, the private, quiet, daily practice of the love directed inward that makes everything built on it genuinely stable rather than performed. You do not have to accept the behavior because you love them. That truth has been established. But the deeper truth, the one that the examination of the adaptation reveals, is this: you do not have to accept the behavior because you love yourself. And the love for yourself that makes the non-acceptance possible is not the dramatic, assertive, externally directed version of self-love that gets performed in the direction of the avoidant. It is the quiet, daily, private, entirely internal practice of returning to your own genuine experience as the first and most important reference point available, before the temperature reading, before the filtering, before the internalized cross-examination, before everything. Your own genuine interior, your own genuine experience, your own genuine worth, held not as a position to defend, but as the simple, lived, daily reality of someone who keeps coming back to themselves. That is the love that was always supposed to come first, not because it is more important than the love you are capable of extending outward, because it is the condition of possibility for that love being genuine rather than desperate, grounded rather than anxious, freely given rather than the product of a self that has been adapted down to the size that someone else's fear finds manageable. Genuine love outward requires the genuine self to be intact. The genuine self requires the love inward to be first. That is the whole thing, and it was always the whole thing.